Formula One script there is a specific kind of Formula One car that would make Lewis Hamilton a 7-time world champion, one of the greatest drivers who has ever lived, genuinely, measurably slow. Not slow because he's lost it, slow in a way he can't fix from inside the cockpit, no matter how hard he pushes. And Max Verstappen climbs into that exact car, on purpose, and calls it fun. Here's the detail that should stop you. It's not two different cars. It can be the identical machine, the same chassis, the same setup, and two of the best drivers on Earth will give you two completely opposite verdicts on it. One climbs out and says the car is a nightmare he can't trust. The other shrugs and says it's a little bit nervous, then goes and sets pole. That gap between undriveable and a little nervous is the entire story of this video. And it reveals something about both men that neither of them usually says out loud. So let's define the car we're actually talking about. Every fast lap needs the car to rotate to change direction quickly through a corner. There are two ways to get that rotation. You can have a stable, planted car and turn it with precise inputs, or you can have a car with a loose, pointy rear end that rotates itself. The back steps out on the way into the corner, the nose snaps toward the apex, and the driver rides that slide. The second kind is faster in the right hands. It is also, for most drivers, terrifying because a rear that moves on its own is a rear that can, at any instant, keep going and spin you into a wall. You've actually seen the difference without knowing what you were looking at. Watch a Verstappen onboard through a fast corner and you'll notice tiny, constant flickers of opposite lock. The car is always slightly sideways, always on the move, and he's catching it 100 times a lap without ever seeming to work. Now watch a driver who needs stability in that same kind of car, and you'll see the opposite, a moment of hesitation on entry, a lift, a correction that comes a beat too late, a lap that looks tidy but is quietly a tenth slow everywhere. Same corner, same physics, two completely different relationships with fear. This is where Lewis Hamilton's greatness runs into a wall of its own. Because Hamilton, for his entire career, has needed one thing before he can go fast: he has to be able to trust the rear of the car. Listen to how he describes it in his own words. He talks about needing full faith in the rear through high-speed corners. He has said he just can't get confidence in a car he doesn't feel connected to. And in one of the most revealing team radio messages of his career, he told his engineer, flatly, "I am very slow because I have no confidence in the car." Sit with that admission for a second, because it's extraordinary. One of the fastest human beings to ever drive a racing car, telling you that his speed isn't just in his hands, it's in his faith. When the trust is there, he is untouchable. When it isn't, a 7-time champion can look ordinary. And that raises the obvious question this whole story turns on: why? Why would confidence, a feeling, decide the lap time of a driver this good? The answer is more physical than you'd think, and we'll get to it. First, understand what trust the rear actually means out on track. To be fast, a driver has to brake impossibly late and throw the car into a corner while still slowing down, committing to a direction change before he's even sure the car will grip. To do that, some part of his brain has to believe the rear will stay planted underneath him. If he doesn't believe it, something deeper than skill takes over. Self-preservation. His foot comes off the brake a fraction early, his hands turn in a little gentler, and half a tenth vanishes in every corner, not because he can't drive, but because the human body refuses to fully commit to something it thinks might kill it. Think of it like sprinting flat out toward a closed door that you're told will slide open at the last second. If you trust it completely, you never break stride. If some part of you doubts it, your legs slow you down whether you want them to or not. You can't override the instinct by trying harder. That's exactly what a nervous rear does to a driver who needs to trust the car. It isn't a courage problem. These are the bravest people on the planet. It's that top-level lap time demands total commitment, and you cannot fully commit to a car that keeps lying to you about whether it's going to catch you. Now here's what makes Verstappen different, and it isn't faster hands. Max doesn't need to trust the rear because he's already planning to catch it. He commits to the corner as if the car is going to slide, because in his mind, it already is. The correction is preloaded before the slide even starts. So that whole "do I trust this car" step, the step that quietly slows everyone else down, he just skips it. He drives a nervous car the way you drive a stable one, because to him the nervousness isn't a threat, it's information. And that is why his own team advisor once described the divide in a single, brutal sentence. Helmut Marko put it like this: the more difficult the car is to drive, the more the difference to Max comes out. When the rear steps out, Verstappen won't lift the throttle, he'll just say, "Yeah, it's a bit nervous." The driver in the other Red Bull, in the same car, says it's difficult. Or undriveable. Same machine, opposite worlds. If you're enjoying this deep dive into what actually separates these two, take a second to subscribe. This channel goes into the driving nobody else explains. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because there's a graveyard of proof. Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Sergio Perez. Every one of them a genuinely fast driver, a race winner or a front runner in his own right. And every one of them was broken by the seat next to Verstappen, not because they suddenly forgot how to drive, but because they preferred a stable car, and they couldn't find confidence in a nervous one. Marko even admitted the philosophy out loud: the car doesn't have to feel comfortable or pleasant, and it's only the second drivers who have the biggest problem with that. Perez is the most heartbreaking example of all. A proven Grand Prix winner, a driver who beat established stars on merit, and beside Verstappen he slowly came apart, chasing a car he found harder and harder to trust while his teammates shrugged off the exact same handling. Red Bull literally had to talk about softening the car, making it more stable. Just to give the second driver a fighting chance, and the moment they did, they risked taking away the sharp, nervous edge Max feeds on. That's the cruelty of it. The setup that saves the teammate is the setup that dulls the genius. A team built around a driver like Verstappen almost can't run a normal driver alongside him. Now hold that thought and put Lewis Hamilton next to it carefully. Because on this one specific axis, the need for a rear you can trust Hamilton belongs in the same category as those drivers. Not as a talent, let's be absolutely clear about that. Hamilton is one of the greatest to ever do it, with a trophy cabinet Gasly and Albon can only dream of. But in terms of what he needs from a car to unlock that greatness, he is a confidence driver, and the car that rewards Verstappen is precisely the car that would rob Hamilton of the faith he runs on. That's not an insult, it's just two great drivers wired for opposite machines. And if you want the clearest modern proof, you only have to look at Hamilton's first year in red. Engineers who studied it were blunt: the Ferrari had weak rear grip. And a car with a weak rear is a car Hamilton cannot lean on through the fast committed corners where lap time is won. One respected F1 engineer put it simply: when Hamilton doesn't have a solid rear underneath him, he struggles. And that's precisely what we saw: a 7-time champion in the most iconic car in the sport, unable to trust the platform and suddenly finishing a whole season without a podium. Not because the talent left, because the trust never arrived. So is that the whole story? Verstappen can drive anything, therefore Verstappen wins? No, and this is the twist most people never get to. Because Hamilton's so-called weakness is secretly one of the most valuable things a driver can bring to a team. Ask yourself something first. Honestly, if you were a team principal building a car for the next 5 years, would you rather have the driver who tells you the brutal truth about it, or the one who hides it from you by being superhuman? Because the answer isn't as obvious as it sounds. Think about what happens when your lead driver refuses to be fast in a bad car. He forces the entire organization to build a good one. Hamilton's need to trust the rear became a kind of quality control, a constant, non-negotiable demand that the car be balanced, planted, and honest. For years, that demand dragged Mercedes toward building some of the finest, most stable racing cars the sport has ever seen, because their driver simply would not paper over a flawed one. A confidence driver keeps his team honest because he can't hide their mistakes, and there's a hidden strategic value in that most fans never consider. A driver who can't mask a problem gives his engineers perfect information. When Hamilton says the rear won't stay with him, that's not a complaint, it's a diagnosis, a precise signal pointing the whole team at exactly what to fix. His discomfort is data. The car that makes him slow is a car he's telling you is genuinely flawed, and a smart team treats that as gold. Verstappen's brilliance, by contrast, scrambles that signal. When he drags a difficult car to a podium, the results say the car is fine even when it isn't, and the truth about the machine gets buried under one man's genius. Verstappen's superpower does the exact opposite, and here is the trap. A driver who can drive anything lets his team get away with building him anything. If Max will drag a nervous, ill-handling car onto the podium anyway, where's the pressure to fix it? And that is very close to the story of his 2026. A Red Bull that no other driver on the grid could score in. Wrestled into results by one man, which means the car's real weaknesses were hidden behind his talent instead of being cured. His greatest gift quietly became his cage. And here's the beautiful, humbling part: even Max has a limit. When a Red Bull once got so unpredictable it turned into what he called a monster, Verstappen said something that should sound very familiar by now. He said that when you're not comfortable, you can't attack the corners. Read that again. That is Lewis Hamilton's exact complaint coming out of Max Verstappen's mouth. The man who drives cars others would hate has a threshold to push a car far enough past the edge, and even he needs to trust it. The difference between these two isn't a wall. It's a spectrum, and they simply sit at opposite ends of it. Step back and you can see two entirely different shapes of greatness. Hamilton is a scalpel. Give him a car he trusts and he will carve lap time no one can touch, but the tool has to be right, or the surgeon can't work. We watched it in 2025, when he couldn't gel with his Ferrari and a 7-time champion looked lost. Before the car came to him in 2026, and so did the podiums. Verstappen is a sledgehammer that somehow also threads a needle. Hand him a broken car and he'll still find a result, but that same tolerance means he can spend his prime dragging cars that don't deserve him. Neither shape is the correct one. They're just different answers to the same brutal question every driver faces: what do you do when the car isn't perfect? Which raises a genuinely fascinating question about where the sport is going. Formula One is deliberately steering toward more stable, more predictable, more forgiving cars, lighter machines, with less of the peaky on the edge behavior that Verstappen feasts on. So think about what that means. If the cars of the future are nicer, calmer, easier to trust, does that quietly erode Verstappen's single biggest advantage, the one that lives entirely in the chaos? A huge part of what makes Max special is that he can go where other drivers are too frightened to follow. But if the sport slowly removes the fear, if it builds cars that no longer bite, then it also removes the exact place where his edge lives. And does a world of friendlier cars end up being a Hamilton world, not a Verstappen one? Because in the end, that's the real revelation hiding inside a clickbait question. Cars Hamilton would hate aren't proof that Verstappen is better. They're proof that these two men solved the same puzzle from opposite directions. Hamilton mastered the art of extracting everything from a car he can trust. Verstappen mastered the art of trusting a car nobody else can. Put each man in the other's dream machine and you would blunt the very thing that makes him great. So I want to hear where you land on this. Is the ability to drive any car, even a bad one, the ultimate mark of a great driver, or is knowing exactly what you need and refusing to accept less the smarter kind of genius? Tell me in the comments and be honest about which driver you're really defending. And if you want more breakdowns that go past the results and into how these drivers actually work, subscribe and stay with the channel, because the deeper you look at these two, the less obvious the best becomes.